At my sister-in-law's baby shower, someone asked when we'd start a family. My husband's laugh cut through the room like glass. With her? I'd rather stay childless. And then it got worse. Please stay with me until the end of my story. And if it moves you, share it so others can hear it too. The room was filled with soft pastel balloons and gentle music, the kind that should have made everyone smile. But beneath the surface, something cold lingered. His words slammed down on me like a sharp blow, twisting the warmth of the gathering into something cruel and unbearable. My husband's sister didn't hesitate to fan the flames, adding a sneer of her own that felt like salt in an open wound. Laughter erupted around us, not the kind that brings joy but the kind that mocks and isolates. No one came to my defense. The silence from others felt like 1,000 tiny betrayals. I met his gaze calmly, my voice steady when I said, "You're not funny." His smirk only widened as he dismissed me with, "Too sensitive, as always." When I tried to leave, his hand gripped my arm, a silent command to stay, to endure the humiliation. I held back the tears, slipping away quietly before anyone else could witness my unraveling. The ride home was a heavy silence, every mile pressing on the ache inside me, the echo of his words filling the car more than the quiet. A week later, my phone buzzed with a message that chilled me. "Please talk to me." It was a desperate plea from the man who'd publicly torn me down. A reminder that this wasn't just a one-time cruelty, but the beginning of a long, painful story I had to tell. In the beginning, our marriage felt like a story written in warm light. He was charming, attentive, and his words promised a future where we'd build a life filled with love and shared dream. Those early days were easy to believe in. Every smile felt genuine, every touch reassuring. But beneath the surface, subtle shadows began to appear, creeping quietly into the spaces between us. At first, his control was almost invisible, wrapped in concern and what he called helpful advice. Decisions about what I wore or who I spent time with were casually questioned, framed as loving gestures. I convinced myself it was normal. After all, love meant involvement, didn't it? But the laughter I once shared with friends slowly grew strained. His jokes, once playful, started to carry a sharper edge, veiled insults masked as humor, often directed at me. At gatherings, I learned to laugh along, a reflex to avoid igniting anger. That forced smile became my shield, even when my heart tightened with each cutting word. The subject of children was a line neither of us crossed easily, yet every mention felt like a minefield. His attitude shifted whenever the topic arose, tension thickening the air like smoke. The question that had been a tender hope for me became another reminder of the gulf between us. Conversations turned icy, and I began to sense a growing distance. Not just in words, but in the way he looked at me, as if I were an obstacle rather than a partner. Isolation crept in slowly, subtle but persistent. Invitations from friends went unanswered, or were met with complaints about my busy schedule. Phone calls were shortened, excuses made for missed dinners or weekends away. I found myself fading from the lives I once loved, tethered instead to his expectations. The people who once filled my world became shadows on the periphery, and I was left alone with the weight of his silent judgment. The baby shower wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a breaking point after months of erosion. It wasn't just the words he spoke that day. It was the accumulation of every small humiliation, every joke at my expense, every glance that made me shrink inside. The cruel comment was a culmination, a public display of a private pattern I'd begun to recognize. The realization hit me hard. Humiliation was his weapon, wielded carefully to chip away at my confidence and keep me under control. Something inside me shifted then. The instinct to fight back or plead for kindness had faded, replaced by a quiet detachment. I started to distance myself emotionally, creating walls around the parts of me that still hoped for love. It wasn't surrender, it was survival. I learned to listen less to his words and more to the silence between them, searching for space to breathe. In that silence, a seed of something new took root. Not revenge, but escape. The thought of freedom began to flicker, tentative and fragile, but growing stronger each day. I started imagining a life beyond his control, where I could reclaim my voice and my self-worth. It wasn't a plan yet, just a quiet hope hidden beneath layers of pain and uncertainty. Every laugh I forced, every invitation I declined, every tense silence was a step toward that hidden dream. I wasn't ready to act, but I was waking up, slowly and painfully, to the truth that I deserved more than this life of quiet suffering. The cracks in the fairy tale were widening, and with them came the possibility of something real, something better. The morning after the baby shower arrived heavy with a silence that spoke louder than any words. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee long since gone cold. The warmth I craved wasn't in the cup, it was in an apology that never came. He moved around the house with the casual air of someone who'd forgotten the night before, as if the cruel remarks and the tension they left behind were invisible, meaningless. But I couldn't erase them so easily. Every word echoed in my mind, looping relentlessly like a broken record. The sharpness of his laugh, the sneer in his sister's tone, the coldness in the room, all played over and over, refusing to let me find peace. Sleep had been elusive, replaced by the weight of humiliation and disbelief. My phone buzzed, a message from a friend who had been at the shower, but too shocked to speak up at the time. Her texts were cautious but full of support, confirming what I'd already sensed. The room had been silent because no one knew how to help. That quiet acknowledgement felt both comforting and isolating. I realized then I was more alone than ever. That afternoon, I made a decision I'd been avoiding for too long. I called a therapist. The number whispered into the phone in a voice I barely recognized. The appointment was booked in secret, a small act of reclaiming control in a situation spiraling out of my grasp. I knew I needed someone to help me navigate the chaos inside my head. Around the same time, I began to document everything, his words, the patterns, the moments that chipped away at my sense of self. I started keeping a journal, not just for myself, but as a silent witness to the abuse he inflicted under the guise of jokes and dismissive comment. It was the first step in turning my pain into something tangible, something I could hold on to. He continued to brush off my feelings, dismissing any hint of discomfort as overreaction or sensitivity. His words were carefully chosen to undermine, to make me question my own reality. When I tried to speak up, he deflected or turned the blame back on me. It was exhausting, and yet I endured, telling myself it was temporary, that things would change. But there was something else, something new and unsettling. Late at night, his phone calls became strange and frequent. The hushed tones, the quick conversations ending abruptly when I entered the room. Suspicion began to take root, twisting like a knot in my stomach. I knew something was being hidden from me, but I didn't yet know what. Outside, I wore a mask of normalcy. I smiled, I laughed, I played the part expected of me. No one outside my small circle saw the turmoil beneath the surface. It was a careful balancing act, one that required every ounce of strength I could summon. I became an expert at hiding the cracks, even from myself. Behind that mask, a quiet resolve was growing. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to prepare. Prepare to uncover the secrets he was desperate to keep, to face the truth that had been lurking just beyond my reach. I told myself that knowledge was power, and if I could find out what he was hiding, I might finally find a way out. The day after was not just another morning. It was the moment when denial began to break, replaced by a flicker of determination. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of hope beneath the weight of betrayal. It was the beginning of a new battle, one fought quietly, carefully, but with a fierce will to reclaim myself. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, where every detail could be a sign or a trap. I started noticing the little things, an unfamiliar lipstick stain on his coffee cup, receipts for dinners and hotel stays he never mentioned. Each one was a crack in the carefully constructed facade he maintained. I kept these clues close, like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't ready to assemble yet, afraid of what the picture might reveal. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, I took a risk I wouldn't have considered before. His phone lay unattended on the kitchen counter, and my fingers trembled as I unlocked it. What I found wasn't just the casual messages of a passing flirtation. There were conversations filled with intimacy, late-night confessions, and plans that didn't include me. The words on the screen carved a wound deeper than any argument. I quickly captured screenshots and sent them to a private email account, a safe place where evidence could accumulate without raising suspicion. Despite everything, I wasn't ready to confront him. The thought of facing him with this knowledge felt like stepping into a battlefield without armor. Instead, I chose silence, letting him believe I was still in the dark. This decision was a paradox, part fear, part strategy. By hiding what I knew, I kept the upper hand, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, the subtle barbs aimed at me didn't cease. In fact, they grew sharper. At social gatherings, he'd make sly remarks disguised as jokes, designed to erode my confidence and keep me off balance. Public digs that left me flinching inside, even as I forced a smile. Behind closed doors, the evidence piled up quietly, screenshots, suspicious transactions, odd patterns in his behavior. Each discovery was a mix of terror and a strange surge of empowerment. I was uncovering the truth, reclaiming pieces of my story one by one. My therapist became a crucial anchor during this time. She urged patience, warning against rash decisions. The path to safety and freedom wasn't a sprint, but a long, careful game. Every step had to be calculated, not just for my sake, but to protect the fragile hope I still clung to. Her voice reminded me that strength wasn't just about confrontation, but also about endurance and strategy. As I pieced together the reality I'd been blind to, a new vision began to take shape, a life beyond his shadow. I imagined mornings without fear, evenings filled with genuine laughter, and the simple joy of waking up knowing I belonged to myself. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, a distant dream slowly edging closer, with each secret uncovered. The weight of betrayal pressed down hard, but beneath it, a quiet resolve grew. I was no longer just a victim in this story. I was becoming the author of what came next. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with risks and unknowns. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of control returning to my hand. Each discovery, each moment of silent observation, was a step toward freedom. The truth was no longer something to fear, but a tool I wielded carefully, a shield and a sword. I wasn't ready to break the silence yet, but the walls were closing in on him, and soon, I would have to decide how to shatter them completely. I began by quietly gathering the small things that meant the most to me: photographs, letters, trinkets that held memories of better days. Under the cover of normalcy, I slipped them into a box and entrusted it to a close friend's care. It was a subtle act, almost invisible, but it marked the first step toward reclaiming parts of myself that had been trapped under years of his control. Next came practical moves I'd long delayed. I opened a separate bank account, carefully hidden from his knowledge. It wasn't just about money, it was about creating a foundation for independence. Alongside this, I changed passwords on every important account: email, social media, even utilities. Securing these digital footholds felt like reclaiming ground in a silent war. Each locked door was a small victory, a barrier between him and the life I was preparing to build. Physically, I started to invest in myself too. I joined a gym, initially to burn off the anxiety and frustration, but it quickly became something more. The act of pushing my body, feeling strength return where it had faded, was healing in a way words couldn't describe. With each drop of sweat, I shed pieces of the woman who had silently endured and began to shape someone stronger, more resilient. He noticed these changes, of course. His eyes would flicker with something unreadable when I looked at him, an edge of suspicion, perhaps. But I wore a mask so well. Fake smiles, practiced tones, the illusion of calm. I played the part of the compliant wife, keeping him convinced that everything was as he wanted. The baby topic, once a source of tension and cruelty, never surfaced again. He seemed to assume he had won that battle, that I had accepted defeat. But beneath that calm exterior, I was drifting further away from him emotionally. The detachment grew like a shield, insulating me from the sting of his words and the weight of his presence. My distance made him uneasy, I could tell. Small cracks showed in his facade, brief moments of frustration, the way his eyes searched mine for signs I wasn't giving away. Still, he said nothing, perhaps too comfortable in his assumed victory. Meanwhile, his other relationship was heating up, occupying more of his time and attention. This inadvertent distraction granted me space, a precious, unspoken freedom. With fewer demands and less scrutiny, I was able to breathe more deeply, think more clearly, and plan more meticulously. I became an actress in my own life, playing the role he expected while quietly scripting my escape. Every smile was a mask, every casual conversation a carefully measured step toward a goal only I fully understood. It was exhausting, draining, but necessary. Behind the scenes, I was laying the groundwork for my perfect exit. The woman I once was subdued, uncertain, silenced, was fading away. In her place, someone new was emerging, cautious, prepared, and ready to reclaim a life that had long been out of reach. The moment everything fell into place came unexpectedly, like a crack in the wall I'd been quietly building around myself. A mutual friend, unaware of how much I already knew, let slip the name of the woman he'd been hiding. It wasn't just a name. It was a key that unlocked months of unanswered questions and silent suspicions. Suddenly, the shadows in the corners of my life grew clearer. Shortly after, I found photos, snapshots of them laughing on a beach, carefree and unburdened. The vacation he'd told me was a work trip wasn't just a lie. It was a betrayal laid bare in vibrant color. The reality hit harder than any argument or insult. Those images weren't just proof of infidelity. They were a confirmation of the cruel mockery behind his words at the baby shower. His dismissive laugh and cutting remark echoed in my mind with new, bitter clarity. I turned to my therapist, who had been my silent guide through the storm. Together, we carefully crafted a plan for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. It wasn't about anger or dramatic revelations. It was about control and clarity. We focused on the facts, every message, every receipt, every photo cataloged and printed. The evidence became my armor, a tangible reminder that I was no longer powerless. Quietly, I reached out to a divorce lawyer, initiating the steps that would secure my future. Each call, each appointment was a quiet defiance against the life I'd been forced to live. I kept everything hidden from him, watching and waiting for the right moment to reclaim my voice. When that moment came, his face was a portrait of shock. The calm I maintained was a sharp contrast to the storm in his eyes. For months, he believed his secrets were safe, that I was oblivious. The power dynamic shifted instantly. I refused to raise my voice or plead. My words were steady and measured. Calmness became my weapon, every sentence a clear boundary drawn in the sand. He begged for a conversation, for understanding, for some flicker of the past we'd lost. But I had rehearsed this moment so many times. What I needed now was closure, not chaos. Without a backward glance, I turned away. For the first time, I walked out on the life I had known, on the man who had tried to erase me, and on the version of myself that had once tolerated his cruelty. The door closed softly behind me, but inside, something had slammed shut forever. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of freedom, hard-earned and fiercely claimed. And as I stepped forward, the weight of years began to lift, replaced by a quiet strength that no betrayal could break. After the confrontation, the backlash hit like a wave I hadn't fully anticipated. His initial texts were frantic, pleas that quickly morphed into sharp accusations. I watched as his desperation spiraled into anger, the tone shifting from guilt to blame in a matter of hours. His messages flooded my phone, a storm of confusion and rage, but I stayed silent, refusing to respond to the chaos. Our social circle fractured almost overnight. Friends I thought were neutral picked sides quickly, some drawn into his narrative, others quietly aligning with it. The division was painful but inevitable. What stung most was the realization that for years, he had been whispering his version of the story behind closed doors, painting me as unstable, overly emotional, someone no one should trust. The image he'd crafted was designed to isolate me further, to undermine my credibility before any truth could surface. Instead of engaging in the swirling drama, I chose a different path. I shared the facts, carefully, calmly, with those who mattered most. No emotional pleas or bitter accusations, just cold, clear evidence. The texts, photos, receipts. I handed them over piece by piece, letting the proof speak for itself. The weight of truth began to shift perception, and slowly, allies reemerged from the shadows. The woman he'd been involved with vanished almost immediately once the truth became known. Whether out of shame or self-preservation, she erased herself from the story, leaving him increasingly exposed and isolated. Without her, the facade he'd built started to crack, revealing the hollowness beneath. His professional life didn't escape the fallout either. His erratic behavior and the rumors swirling around him reached his workplace. Colleagues grew wary, and what had been a respected position became precarious. The pressure mounted as the personal betrayal spilled into his public life, undermining his carefully maintained image. His family, caught in the crossfire, reached out to me in scattered, tentative ways. Torn between loyalty and the uncomfortable truths they'd been forced to confront, their messages were cautious, sometimes apologetic, sometimes probing. I met their attempts with measured responses, understanding that they too were navigating the fallout of his choices. Throughout it all, I refused to be drawn into drama or petty conflict. I kept my distance from the bitterness and the gossip, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding my own. The public mask he had worn, polished, confident, untouchable, began to crumble piece by piece. Watching from afar, I saw his carefully constructed world unravel, the image of perfection giving way to something far less impressive. It wasn't satisfaction or revenge that I felt watching his collapse. It was relief. Relief that the truth was finally out, that the lies no longer held power over me. From a quiet distance, I witnessed the end of his story and the beginning of mine, knowing that the hardest part was behind me and the freedom I'd fought for was finally within reach. The first morning alone in my new apartment was filled with a quiet kind of peace I hadn't known in years. The silence wasn't heavy or oppressive. It felt like a clean slate, a space where I could finally breathe without the weight of his words pressing down on me. I woke up without the familiar knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach, replaced by something tentative but real, hope. As days passed, I began to reclaim parts of myself I'd long neglected. I dusted off old hobbies he had once mocked, painting, reading novels late into the night, even trying my hand at cooking new recipes. Each small success, each brushstroke or page turned, became a quiet rebellion against the years I'd spent shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. It was like rediscovering colors I'd forgotten existed. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in a long time, those who had gently faded away as his influence grew stronger. Their responses were warm, sometimes surprised, but mostly filled with relief to have me back. These reconnections grounded me, reminding me that I wasn't as isolated as I had feared. I began to rebuild my social world piece by piece, savoring conversations that weren't laced with tension or hidden agendas. Therapy shifted from a desperate attempt to survive each day to a deeper process of healing and understanding. Instead of simply managing pain, I started learning how to nurture myself, to untangle the threads of self-doubt and guilt he had woven into my identity. It wasn't quick or easy, but it was steady progress, a slow unfolding of strength that felt like sunlight through cracked windows. I found joy again in the ordinary moments, the scent of fresh coffee in the morning, the way sunlight streamed through the curtains, the quiet laughter shared with a friend. These simple pleasures, once overshadowed by conflict and fear, became my anchors. They reminded me that life, even when broken, could still be beautiful. It was startling to realize how much I had dimmed myself for years. The constant criticism, the endless questioning of my worth, it had left me cautious and withdrawn. But now, with distance and clarity, I could see those parts of me begin to shine again. Saying no didn't feel like defiance anymore. It felt like self-respect. For the first time in a long time, I felt the power to set boundaries without guilt or second-guessing. Without his voice echoing in my mind, the silence was no longer oppressive but freeing. His constant criticism, the sharp words that had once defined my days, were gone. In their place, I learned to laugh, genuinely, freely, without restraint. The laughter felt like a breath, a reclaiming of joy that had been denied for too long. With each passing day, my future seemed less like a closed door and more like an open horizon. The possibilities that had felt out of reach were suddenly within grasp. I was no longer trapped by fear or doubt. Instead, I was moving forward, step by step, into a life that was entirely my own. Weeks after I walked away, the calls started, random numbers flashing on my phone. His voice, strained and pleading, barely recognizable from the man I once knew. Sometimes angry, sometimes pitiful, each call a desperate attempt to break through the walls I'd built. I didn't answer. I let the voicemail pile up, each message heavier than the last, dragging me back into a past I was determined to leave behind. Then came the letters, some written with fury, lashing out at what he called my betrayal. Others dripping with false remorse, begging for forgiveness, promising he had changed. The contrast between the two only made his desperation clearer. It wasn't about reconciliation, it was about control. I read them once, then folded them carefully and set them aside. There was no place for his manipulation in my life anymore. Rumors began to swirl through mutual friends and acquaintances. Whispers about his financial troubles, the way his social circle was shrinking as people distanced themselves. I heard about his nights spent alone, the way his once confident stride had turned into something hesitant and unsure. One afternoon, I saw him by chance at a cafe, gaunt, worn down, the weight of his own downfall etched on his face. There was no satisfaction in seeing him like that, only a quiet relief that the facade had finally cracked. He tried to pull me back with memories, reminding me of better times, the promises we'd made. His words were coated in nostalgia but laced with guilt, thinly veiled attempts to make me responsible for his misery. Each time, I responded with calm firmness, refusing to be drawn into his emotional game. I reminded myself why I had left and why I needed to stay free. His last effort was the most dangerous, a solemn vow that he had changed, that he was different now. But I recognized the manipulation beneath the surface. I saw through the masks he wore so well. With a final breath of resolve, I blocked his number, ending the cycle once and for all. In that moment, the last emotional chain snapped. Freedom wasn't just a word anymore, it was real. The memory of that baby shower lingers, not just for the sharp words or the laughter that cut deeper than any knife, but for what it revealed about the man I thought I knew. It wasn't about me being too sensitive or fragile. It was about him needing to assert control by breaking me down, piece by piece, so he could feel bigger. The realization settled in slowly, like a cold weight lifting. His cruelty was never about me, it was about his own insecurities. In the quiet aftermath, I understood that what I'd truly reclaimed wasn't just freedom from a toxic relationship. It was the core of myself that had been buried beneath his endless criticism and manipulation. Reclaiming my identity meant more than leaving. It meant learning who I was without his shadow looming over every decision, every thought. I find myself grateful for the few who saw the truth quietly and stood by me without judgment. Their silent support, their steady presence when I felt most alone, became my foundation. They didn't ask for drama or spectacle. They simply reminded me that I was worth more than the lies and betrayals. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about tearing down his life or seeking to punish him. It was about building mine. The true triumph wasn't in watching him falter or crumble. It was in the slow, steady process of rebuilding myself piece by piece, brick by brick. It was in learning to trust again, to laugh again, to embrace life without apology or fear. The calm that comes with moving on without bitterness is something few understand until they've walked through fire themselves. There's a quiet power in letting go, in refusing to be defined by pain or anger. His last desperate message, "Please talk to me," remains unanswered, not out of cruelty but because I've chosen peace over chaos. I am no longer his audience. Now, my days unfold in a brighter light, one I shape on my own term. The weight of constant criticism and doubt has been replaced by a freedom I didn't know was possible. I move through the world unapologetically, not as someone who's survived, but as someone who's reclaimed her voice, her strength, and her future. Sometimes, I think the best revenge isn't confrontation or exposure. It's disappearance, the quiet exit from a story that no longer serves you. It's walking away so completely that the past becomes nothing more than a shadow fading behind you. And in that disappearance, there is power, peace, and the promise of a life rebuilt from the ashes.